Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know time is very valuable, so I always feel really appreciative when people can take some time out of their busy schedule to spend it with us. I'm Sheila, Signet's president and COO. Signet is a company that does a number of things fully in support of students. We offer tutoring services, test prep, admissions consulting, and of course coaching, which is what we're here to introduce you tonight. And we try to be as holistic as possible when we offer these services. So nothing is ever in isolation. You know, a student's life is a student's life, and all of those things can impact their academic performance and vice versa. So you'll hear us talk a lot about kind of those things tonight. And we really focus on the high school age group, but I'm hoping there'll be things for those of you with kids who are other ages to learn from this presentation as well. And tonight I'm joined by Andrea West, who is Signet's Director of Operations and one of our master coaches. Andrea's been with us for a very long time now. 8 years. 8 years, yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there's nobody better to explain what coaching is to all of our attendees tonight than Andrea. She has such a keen insight on, you know, the value of coaching and has had a lot of experience with students and can share with us some of the outcomes. So with that, I'm going to start my screen share. And we'll start going through slides. My goal will be to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you have questions that come up while we're presenting, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will come back to them when we get to Q&A. Andrea, anything you want to add before I start?
No, that sounds perfect.
Okay, here we go. Crossing fingers that this actually works, because sometimes it doesn't. All right, you guys see a full screen version? Excellent, because we're off to a good start. So again, thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're here to talk about whether your student needs a tutor, a therapist, or a coach. And I'm sure some of you were like, wait, I didn't know any of these things would be valuable to my student. I don't know if my student needs help. So that's kind of where we want to start. Is thinking about how do students indicate that they might need some help or support. In rare cases, some students will ask for it directly, like, I'm really struggling in this math class, could I get a tutor? Or I need some help, or my teacher hasn't been able to help me understand this. I think I need to ask somebody else for this. But I will tell you, that's really not the common occurrence. More often you see indirect signs that they are struggling. You may witness, or they may be expressing having stress or anxiety around their academics.
I'll keep that on. I'll keep it on this.
Oh, I'm gonna make sure everybody's muted. Okay, good. So they may express this. And you might see it in different ways. You might see unhealthy eating or sleep habits, or like, are they sleeping? Are they sleeping at all? What time are they going to bed? What time do they have to wake up in the morning? You might see something that you might consider more of an objective measure, like their grades are falling. You might hear from their teacher or see a test or a quiz or even a semester grade that is not what you had expected, or it was lower than before. Or just signs of overwhelm. They're disengaging from school, they're not motivated. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, but it can be indicating the same sort of issue, they may be striving for a sort of perfectionism that is causing them to overwork, over-prepare, and it's just wearing them thin. I think the thing that all of these things have in common is this image here, that it's a roller coaster, right? These are young people who don't always know how to advocate for themselves or express themselves or even understand what they are feeling and what's causing it. So you may see all sorts of things. It may be very inconsistent. If you see any of these things or notice your child is behaving differently than you know what you're used to, it's worth probing. What's going on here? Is this related to something at school, something at home, something else entirely? And it's important to open up that conversation. So if you've identified that something's going on and they need some help, you might be asking, now what? Now what do I do? I know they need help, but where do I even start? It's helpful to understand what help is out there and what's actually going to have an impact on your student's specific situation. Is that solution relevant to what's going on for them? You want to get a sense of how urgent is the situation? Like, do they have an exam tomorrow and we need to get them help tonight? Or is this urgent in a different way? Their confidence is quickly being eroded. They might be in danger of hurting themselves or others. You know, there are other types of urgency you should be aware of with whatever is going on with your student. For us, it's also really important to gauge how willing is the student to accept support. We have so many students that, for whatever reason, don't want to ask questions in class. They don't want to go to their teacher for extra help. They don't want to admit that they need some help. And it takes a certain amount of vulnerability and even confidence to be able to say, I'm struggling. I need to ask for mom or dad's help, or, you know, an outside tutor's help, something like that. If they are not willing, sorry. Oh,
Thanks.
yeah, of course. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm just going to mute everybody. Thanks. So if they are not willing to accept support, reaching out to a tutor, therapist, or coach may not actually do anything beyond create more strife in your relationship with the student. So it's an important kind of thing to feel out. I know a lot of families call us and say, well, my kid doesn't want help, but they are coming to this tutoring session. And that's always a red flag for us, because there are certainly some cases where they meet the tutor and something changes, they open up and they, you know, are willing to engage in the process. But most of the time, they're just so resentful of being there that everything is just going over their head, or they're making it very difficult to actually get anything done in a tutoring session. So it kind of backfires. And then another question that I think has become particularly relevant is, do you need something in person or online? And that goes for tutoring, therapy, and coaching, because there are plenty of therapists who do telehealth now. But for some students, online can be, you know, stressful, or there can be more distractions. For some students, it's easier for them to disengage a little bit because it's just a person on a screen. For some students, it's the opposite, where meeting online feels like there is the screen to kind of protect them from the other person, so they don't mind it so much. Or it's just more convenient because they don't have to travel somewhere. They're in the comfort of their own home. So you kind of want to figure out what's going to work best for your student. In our experience, tutoring can have the same impact, whether in person or online. What really is the determining factor there is how willing is your student to engage and accept support. So it's not like you're going to have a worse outcome if you do it online, or a worse outcome if you do it in person. It's more about what's going to fit your lifestyle and what is your student going to be more amenable to. So those are some, you know, initial questions to kind of think through. And then we can talk a little bit more about, you know, the three options that we're kind of putting out there. And there's certainly many more options than this for supporting your students. But the first one I'll talk about is therapy. We are not therapists, but I will tell you what therapy typically addresses. And you know, therapy is not just for students who have quote unquote problems, right? Therapy, I think, can be valuable for anybody. And in fact, I wish everybody in this world had access to a therapist. I think we'd be in a much better place. But with that said, you know, the kind of acute things that you might seek out a therapist for would be a mental health concern, risky or harmful behaviors, challenges with communicating with your child, or challenges in the relationship, or you notice they're having challenges in their relationship with teachers or friends, or even with themselves. Stress, anxiety, overwhelm, emotional instability, that roller coaster I was talking about earlier, you know, incidents of trauma, grieving, or issues of self-confidence. Therapy can be very helpful for that as well. And of course, there's a much broader list of things that therapy can help you with. There are many different types of therapy that are targeted towards various types of behaviors or situations. But generally, this is what we're talking about when we're saying therapy. Right. The other place you might think to look for support for your student is tutoring. This is when a student is having trouble understanding specific concepts within a class. They are having difficulty demonstrating that knowledge on a test or a paper or a project. You know they know it, but for whatever reason, they can't perform on that assessment to demonstrate their mastery. They may be struggling to keep up with the workload of a class. And with tutoring, it's more about they're falling behind because they don't understand something. And that's why these assignments are piling up. It's hard for them to get through them. It's not an organizational issue. They may have low confidence in a particular subject area. I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, my daughter thinks she's bad at math. And that really breaks my heart, because people aren't good or bad at a subject. You need knowledge and practice, and then, you are what you are. But some students come in with this belief, like, I'm just no good at history, or chemistry is too hard for me, or I had a really bad biology teacher one year and now I just hate biology. And so that covers the kind of second half of this bullet point. Sometimes it's the teacher. Like, I don't want to blame teachers. They're going through a lot. They've been through a lot. They do so much for our students, but sometimes there's some teachers who are just not making that connection, right? It may be, they don't have that connection with your student in particular, or the way they teach in general is not conducive to your students' understanding. For whatever reason, your child may say, I just don't feel like this teacher is going to help me understand this. And then we also get students who are seeking tutoring because they want to kind of get ahead. They want to preview the material that's coming up in this class so they can stay on top of things, or they're just fascinated by a particular subject area and they want to do some exploration and feed their intellectual curiosity. And in some cases, they're trying to place into a higher level of a course, and they're going to work with a tutor so that they can kind of get ahead with the curriculum. So those are the kinds of things that tutoring tends to address. But tonight I want to tell you about a third way, and that is coaching. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to take us through all of the coaching stuff. And Andrea, you're just going to tell me when you want me to move the slides ahead.
Yes, please. Sounds good. So before I even get into like the text on the screen here, as you were talking, Sheila, I'm imagining kind of a Venn diagram, right? Where therapy is emotional based, it's across a whole life. You're talking about your history, you're previewing your future, and it's all about kind of the experience of being a person, I think, in a lot of ways. Tutoring is quite tactical. It's based on a curriculum. You have very clear and explicit goals most of the time for what's trying to be accomplished. And it's really contained in the biology class, the math class, the English class, right? What I love about coaching is that, to me, it really sits in the middle of those things and can kind of bridge the gap, right, between what we experience or what our students experience in their emotional lives, and how that kind of shows up in the classroom or, wherever they are trying to perform, right? So in that way, coaching may address chronically low grades that happen across all subject areas, not just kind of related to a certain type of subject, address a lack of motivation that can show up in school along with procrastination. A lot of times those things happen hand in hand. It might help address a lack of consistency, where at the beginning of the year things are going super great and your students like really pumped and excited to be at school. 2 months later, they're a little bit bored and all of a sudden they've fallen behind on assignments, right? Related to all of those experiences a student might have, might be something like an ADHD diagnosis, really clear executive functioning challenges, or other learning differences that they may or may not be diagnosed with. Again, worth mentioning that, we don't diagnose these things, or we are not kind of professional experts in the particular diagnosis and like the care of like a medical condition. But we know how to work with students who encounter problems because of these diagnoses, because we see it all the time, right? And with that, just a general feeling of difficulty staying on track, coaching is very good for addressing. So we can go to the next slide. I think it's also important to point out that coaching is not just for students who are struggling academically, like we were just talking about. I often find that the students who might benefit from coaching the most are maybe students who are getting great results. They have a great report card, their teachers love them, things are going great on paper, but they're really paying the price in some other way, right? High performing students who are constantly stressed, up all night, leaning way too heavily into perfectionism, having some sort of emotional difficulty because they have to work so hard to get the results that you're seeing. That maybe they are facing challenges due to those, learning disabilities that I mentioned, but they still have high performance, right? So it's comes at a higher cost because they're fighting against all of these challenges that might come along with a diagnosis, and they're making it out okay, but they're probably pretty burnt in order to get there. Um, on other sides of things might be, a student feels like school is kind of boring for them and they're not sure where else to get a feeling of fulfillment or excitement about what they're learning. They might be a bigger fish for the pond that they've been put in, right? Maybe their school isn't up to the rigor that they're capable of, but they just don't know what to do with that, right? They're students who are wanting to push outside of a comfort zone, might want to explore new and different ways of thinking, might not feel like they're thinking about school the same way that their peers are. And I love this last bullet point. They have trouble connecting to like the why of what they're doing, this hard work that they're going through, because they've been told that's what they should do. They're following rules. They're very good at getting assignments done, but they're not sure like what is really motivating them at the end of the day and can't kind of see the future that they're setting up for themselves. So in that way, we're helping both students who are struggling to keep up and students who are struggling kind of in other emotional ways at school. Next slide, Sheila. So, a lot of parents come to us, maybe not super clear on what academic coaching is, or can't quite put their finger on what they're asking for, or might have trouble kind of adapting to what we do, because I think in most cases, people know what a therapist is, and people can know and figure out what a tutor is, but academic coaching is a little bit of something different. So I like to think of it kind of like an athletic coach, right? Most people know what that is. So what does an athletic coach do for their team, for their athletes, right? What they're doing is helping set goals and targets for improvement, knowing what the team needs to do the next time they play a game to beat an opponent, whatever. I don't play sports. Maybe a difficult metaphor for me. But anyway, they're helping them cope with the stress and the high pressure that comes with playing that sport, performing highly. They're keeping the motivation up, making sure people don't get burnt out, understand where the motivation comes from, fostering that. They're helping their team to analyze their performance so far, and understand where they need to adapt next time. What went wrong? What do we need to tweak? How can we continue to edit what we do in order to be successful, and help everybody work towards a vision of, okay, like, what are we trying to do? What do we need to do to win this trophy? And how can we bring, step up to that challenge in a way that's meaningful? And in a lot of ways, I think that's kind of exactly what academic coaches end up doing, right? You're not hiring an academic coach to play the sport for your student or be out there on the field with them or tell them, exactly what they need to do to win the game, because nobody can really do that. It's preparing them with the skill set that they need in order to kind of figure things out for themselves in a way that is supported by their coaches. So next slide, please, Sheila. So connecting to the how do we do that in an academic setting? Coaches are there to help their students set their own goals and understand, plan the next steps, adapt to challenge and failure, similar to like you might see in an athletic setting, right? We're putting a student at the center of this process, right? In the same way that, a therapist, if we're thinking about this Venn diagram, right? A therapist is putting the person at the center of the experience. A coach is going to put the student at the center of the experience, but instead of saying, okay, let's sit down and understand your emotional life and your landscape and dig deeper into, who you are as a person and where you've come from, coaching then takes that into an action-focused approach. Right? It's more than just the tactics of like, okay, you're going to meet with me as a coach. I'm going to hand you a pamphlet of exercises to do, and here's a calendar. And let me organize your backpack. Things are all set now. Magic, right? Does not work that way. Instead, we're creating a safe space for students to identify what's going wrong, what's going right, um, figure out what they need to do in a safe space where they can kind of make mistakes or feel like they're not quite sure what's going on, or they need some practice to be able to even answer that question of like, oh my gosh, what is my problem, right? So in that way, I think what we do is truly encourage and foster life skills for students that though we're working purely in this academic setting, can expand beyond what they're experiencing in school and kind of follow them throughout life, which is one of the things I really love to observe. So we can go next slide.
Before we move on, actually, there's a question in the chat that I
Yes.
think would be really great
Oh,
for you to address. Beth is asking, what kind of
okay.
educational and work training do academic coaches have? Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, it is not standard, which I think is actually quite valuable, right? We have our team of academic coaches. I'd say the core team is maybe 1, 2, 3, like there's like four or five of us, maybe depending on the time of year, right? And unlike becoming a therapist, where there's a very clear path in education and requirements and internships and whatnot. Coaches come from all sorts of different academic backgrounds, and I think makes their perspective quite valuable, right? We have former counselors and people who have worked in mental health settings. We have people who are former professors or PhDs, or have worked in a classroom setting or whatever, So there's significant educational background from wherever we come from, but it's all different. And what we do is unite under like a certain like a shared methodology. I won't bother getting into some of the details, but we're all working together in kind of the same framework to, like, I don't know, bring our own perspectives to what we're talking about, but with it being so student focused, we're allowing the student to, not necessarily model off after what we do, but rather take what we can bring from our experiences and kind of learn from them that way. I know I'm rambling on that question, but Sheila, maybe there's something
That's
else
okay.
I
Yeah,
could add.
I'll
I
just
got lots
add,
of my own.
as
Yeah.
Andrea
Uh-huh.
said, our coaches come from very different academic backgrounds. She mentioned one of our coaches has a counseling background.
Yes.
Another one is a mindfulness coach, and has like a certification in that. There are no standard curriculums for coaching training. We follow the International Coaching Federation guidelines and methodology for coaching, which, as Andrea is saying, is extremely student-centered. It's about, the coach learning how to reserve their own judgment, their own ideas in place of prioritizing the student. At Signet, we've also developed a framework that we call the 5 keys to academic success, which, we could talk about it another time, or you could look at on our blog. But at Signet, our coaches are hand-selected from our pool of other tutors that we think that they have, the quality, the personality, let's say, and the ability to set the right tone. And then we select them to go through our coaching training as well. You will find lots of people out in the world that call themselves coaches. So if, the idea here is for you to be able to be like an informed consumer, so you can select the best coach for your child. There are a couple of things that I would say you want to think about is, what is their training? If your student has a very specific diagnosis, does this coach have experience with that diagnosis or any sort of training around modalities that might help with that? I would say that one of the biggest things you want to think about is, how well does your student get along with this person? Because at Signet, we really believe that relationship is like half the battle. Helps the student stay engaged, feel safe, feel vulnerable enough to say, I need help with this, or be honest about why this thing is a challenge, which can be a little embarrassing for teenagers especially. So it's really important that the student feels this great rapport with their coach. So that would be one of the key questions. All right, I'll let you get back to the presentation, but I thought this was a good moment to address that.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I actually think, and yeah, we can go to the next slide here because that's a nice segue talking about the vulnerability that comes in coaching because um, a central concept to the coaching that I do and our coaches do is understanding that we're working a lot in a state of reflection, asking questions, digging around into what's going on with the student. Most of what we're doing is conversation. We have tools and tricks and tips and things if a student's identifying a particular problem. But that is such a small portion of actually what happens in a coaching session, right? What I'm really trying to do is help a student develop the muscle for reflection because I truly believe it works like a muscle, right? If you get all the way through high school never having reflected on your experience, your goals, what you're hoping out of life, the why of why you're doing what you're doing, you might end up in college having no idea what's going on, can't really remember how you got there, and you're not quite set up for success. Um, Versus if a student's exposed to this kind of thinking, this skill development, they're working on this muscle from early in their high school career, that's not only going to help them be a compelling candidate for college, creating a great profile with excellent grades and all sorts of impressive things, but it's really going to set up them to have the skills that they need in order to be successful in college, career, and I think even life beyond. Um, and it's truly also about understanding that this is all a process, right? Reflection and learning is a process, that failure is a part of that, that thinking you want one thing, understanding you don't want it, and redirecting is a process, that encountering a tricky problem more than once is a process, that finding success somewhere and then all of a sudden it starts to disappear and you don't quite know what happened. That is a process, all of which we see in life, but we really see in school a lot, right? So, what coaching is not promising is that all of a sudden you're going to meet with your coach for a few sessions, your problems are going to be solved, and you're never going to encounter them again. Rather, it's showing students that hey, you're going to survive everything that's going on, and you're going to have to learn from it, and you're going to work your way towards developing kind of a sense of meaning for why we're here in the first place, right? You can probably hear in the way that I talk about it, again centered in that Venn diagram of the emotional experience of therapy, understanding humanness, and the academic context setting, and all the goals that come around with being a high school student or a college student or a middle school student, right? And I like to say a central kind of thing that we're working on in coaching is really developing a strong sense of values. So what's important to you, and a strong sense of vision. The why, where are we going, and why is it important for us to go there? And that answer is different for every single student, which is arguably, I think, the most impactful result that you could ask for beyond better grades or a more impressive application, right? Um, so I have two quick slides next just to show an example of some activities that we might do in coaching that get us to these places. And they might be surprising activities if you were thinking I was going to tell you how I help a student make a calendar or organize their emails, which is something I do. But instead, when we're thinking about this process of developing reflection as a skill, I always, in all my new engagements with students, start with this exercise. We call it the life satisfaction wheel, where we are just doing a little check-in on all of these different aspects of life beyond just academics, and wondering, hey, how satisfied are you with how things are going in this particular aspect of life, right? And then we pick it, the student identifies a number, we kind of fill it all in, and then we use that as kind of a visual representation of like, hey, how are things going? And like, where really are your stressors coming from? Where are you feeling successful? Are you telling me everything's a 10 out of 10? Because that's probably not honest. And maybe we need to work on you being more vulnerable and honest. Or is everything a 2 out of 10 and you're feeling way too hard on yourself? And that's something that we need to address. So opening up this opportunity to talk about talk about these maybe more sensitive topics, or start to understand the holistic life a person leads. And then we're able to do this over and over again over time and see how things grow and change. The expectation is, the goal is not to get everything 10 out of 10 all the time. The goal is to observe and see how things are moving around, which I also encourage everybody in my life to do every once in a while. It's a great opportunity to check in. And then the last of my slides, Sheila's next. When we talk about developing a system of values, one of my favorite things to do is pull up a list pretty much exactly like this, and work with students on what is standing out to them as something that is on their values list, what doesn't stand out to them, where do they want to focus more energy or less energy, and that helps us think about what the goals in the classroom really are. Is it achievement and getting perfect grades? Is it investing more in friendships, understanding, the value that people in social life comes into play? Is it service? Is it thinking about how to expand, the success a student is feeling beyond themselves? So, this can take in many different directions, but I think between this and the life wheel, I get a really clear picture of who my students are when they're coming to me and they're getting started, and that all helps us lead our way towards the goals that our students are trying to achieve in their academics, which is quite beautiful. And then with that, I think, Sheila, I'm passing the mic back to you to talk about how all three of these things are ultimately working together, at least how we see them work together.
Yeah, sure. And before we move on from this slide, like, personal values are something that I always talk about, and I think every adult should have, because it becomes such an important framework for decision making. If a student can start to think about who are they, what do they value, what kind of person do they want to be, what do they want their values to be, and then think about, okay, how do I move the needle from being, for example, so focused on achievement and moving more towards balance or compassion or whatever it may be. When they have a clear sense of what matters most to them, what they want to prioritize over other things, then when a new problem comes up, a new challenge comes up, or a big decision comes up, like, where should I go to college? What kind of career should I pursue? What kind of partners should I seek out in my life, or friendships should I seek out in my life? They have a clear set of values that they can look to say, how well does this opportunity or this person align with my values? I was doing a podcast a couple of weeks ago with, some grown adults who were talking about, a lot of people feeling dissatisfaction in their jobs. And a lot of that dissatisfaction comes from a misalignment of personal values with the company's values or the employer's values. So I brought up the life wheel and these values that, we can feel unfulfilled if we're not working towards these things that are our true values. So it's a really important exercise, I think, for everyone to go to. And what a gift to be able to help a teenager identify these things before life gets too complicated, before they lose sight of, who they really are and who they want to be. So that's one of the reasons we love doing this work. But as Andrea said, we do see a lot of students working with both therapists and tutors, and then sometimes also needing a coach. There are definite places where they overlap. Andrea's been diagram that she's been talking about, and certainly our tutors kind of always take a slightly coaching approach to what they're doing with students in tutoring engagements, just because that's Signet's personality. Like, we coach each other all the time. It's how we want to treat our clients, our colleagues, and our students. But there are really important ways that these three entities, or any two of them, can work together to support a student. So most of the time, when a student has a therapist that they have established a relationship with, and they're working with a coach or a tutor, we ask if we can connect those parties together. You think about it as like a support team for the student, because there may be things that are happening in an academic setting that are impacting the student emotionally, and they want to talk about in therapy. Maybe they bring that up to the tutor or the coach, and they're going to say, hey, this is not my training. Why don't you put that on your list of things to bring up to your therapist? Or the other way around. A therapist might be seeing a whole lot of anxiety about school and uncover with a student that it's because of, some comment that somebody made in the chemistry class and it's really shaken their confidence. Well, that's important for a tutor to know and be able to say, well, let's go over this chemistry knowledge and see the data if you know it or if you don't know it. And if you don't know it, then there's something we can do about it. If you do know it, hopefully that will help you build your confidence back up, right? So there's some real value in having an open line of communication between any of these people. And we really enjoy it. We find that collaborative relationship is just beneficial for everybody involved. Is there anything you would add to this, Andrea?
No, but I think, so yes. The way that we've kind of framed this presentation so far might have suggested that there's one right path to go for a student, right? That maybe you want this or something like this or something like this. But I think our most successful students get a little bit from everything, right? They're making broader academic plans with their coaches. They're seeking tutoring in the particularly sticky subjects that are really holding them back. And they're also going to a therapist and they're addressing their emotional needs more broadly. So I think that might be just like an important thing to keep in mind, that some students really benefit from all three. And I think what our team does particularly well is we identify the boundaries of what we can and cannot do, right? You probably hear in a lot of what I'm saying that there is a lot of therapy adjacency in what coaching does. I think, thinking about coaching as action focused is perhaps the biggest distinguishing factor. But often if we're working with a student and we can't get to that action because the emotions are too tangled, or there's clearly so much anxiety, or there's clearly a lot of baggage, or there's clearly like a difficult relationship in their life getting in the way, we're often suggesting and bringing in a therapist to that equation as well. So if you're kind of thinking, all right, where does my student kind of land? You can start in one place and get trusted that you're going to get the advice and the counseling you need if other things are involved. Of course, I can only speak to what we do, but I know that that's a conversation that Sheila comes across a lot.
Yeah, and it actually reminded me of one other situation. I know that just given the mental health crisis right now, and I think the revelations that came from that period of remote learning that we're all still struggling to move out of, there are huge backlogs for neuropsych evaluations, for getting a therapist. And then you also, with a therapist especially, you want to make sure it's the right fit. And so you wait for weeks and weeks to get in with this therapist, and then it's like, doesn't go anywhere. You've got to wait for weeks and weeks to get in with another therapist. It can be very frustrating. Coaching can be a really great interim solution to help mitigate some of the impacts that whatever situation is leading you to seek therapy might be having on their academics, right? We don't do a lot of kind of triage, and we used to call them rescue missions with students who are like so far behind, they just need to get caught up. But a coach can be very helpful in that situation about kind of stepping back, thinking about the bigger picture, setting priorities, breaking down large assignments into specific actionable tasks, getting all of that stuff organized. A student can actually start digging themselves out of this hole before they are engaged with a therapist. So whether that's a tutor or a coach can be a very good interim solution while you're on one of those waiting lists. All right, we're going to stop talking. We'll talk to answer your questions, but now I want to sort of open it back up to everybody here. I'm going to stop my screen share so you can see our faces. But does anybody have questions about coaching or their own specific situation that you'd like us to turn our attention to? You can put it in the chat or come off mute and just ask us directly.
Could you talk a little bit about college advising for juniors?
We absolutely can. Yeah, that's one of the things that we do. So I'll first try to put it in the context of coaching, because that often comes up. What's the relationship? How can this help students prepare for college? But I'll also tell you what we do for college advising in general. So we love when students do coaching with us and also work on admissions or have admissions goals in mind, because that work that we're doing to help them take stock of their lives and where they want to be is sort of exactly what's needed in the college application, right? If they have a really clear understanding of their values and their vision for their life, who they want to be and what they want to be doing, they're going to be really well prepared to write those application essays, make decisions about where they want to apply, what kind of majors they want to consider, what kind of career path they're setting themselves up for. So the coaching aspect can be very clarifying in terms of a student, being ready to embark on that process. And it doesn't have to be just in junior year. We do a lot of admissions and coaching work with students before that, because really the college application process, though you're only writing application materials and maybe making some of those specific decisions towards the end of junior year and into senior year, everything that happens from freshman year on is represented in your college application. So it's worth thinking critically about where students are investing their time, what kind of classes they're taking, what their grades are like, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you would add to that part of this answer, Andrea?
I'd say that, there are students that come to us for admissions help that didn't come from coaching, right? There are plenty that do that. But ultimately, it takes them longer to get to where they need to be. They're encountering a lot of struggles in a really high stress environment because they're on a timeline to make decisions. So I would say for students who maybe that reflection comes a lot more naturally. They have a very clear picture of what they want to do. They have really good supports at school, or they've gotten some guidance already. Jumping right into the admissions process in junior year usually goes quite well for those types of students. But we have a lot of students where that transition into the college prep phase is really difficult because it forces a lot of those questions on top of all the logistical things they need to do to put an application together. We see both, but in the interest of framing this within coaching, it certainly pays off if you get a student in coaching for years and then
one of the biggest ways it pays off is that they're less swayed by what everybody else is doing, right? I think that's one of the biggest things that happens when you start thinking about the college process. It's like, well, what is the kid down the block doing, and who's the valedictorian in school, and how many extracurriculars are they in, and how many, what was their SAT score? And you get kind of sucked into this idea of what you should be doing without any direct relationship to like what actually matters to the student, what kind of colleges are they the best fit for, and what's going to help them put their best foot forward in the admissions process. So to transition to like purely just admissions in your question, Grace, we work with students as early as 9th grade to just be a sounding board for them when they're making decisions that could impact their college applications. We have a team of former admissions officers who do this work one-on-one with students. We'll help them through everything from, helping them explore extracurriculars that are meaningful, fun, educational for them, to picking classes, helping them think about relationships with their teachers, what they're learning from their friends and mentors, all the way to those more logistical questions of, how far away from home are you willing to go for college? And what kind of campus are you looking for, open or closed? Do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be around 3,000 students or 20,000 students, right? So we can help them think through all of those preferences, connect them to the reality of what that would look like for them in a college. And then, of course, get all of the application ins and outs organized, set a timeline, help them understand the purpose of every piece of the application, guide them through the writing process, prepare for interviews, any of that. So if that's something you want to hear more about, definitely reach out to me. We can have a one-on-one conversation about how we can support your student. I had another question about rates for coaching. Generally, I think you'll find in the area coaching typically starts at 150, 175 an hour and goes up from there. At Signet, we do have some coaches, I think, at the 225 rate, but the majority of our coaches are 275 or 300 an hour. And I want to add the context that coaching sessions are rarely an hour long. Oftentimes we're meeting maybe twice a week with a student for 30 minutes each time. For very high performing students, sometimes it's a half an hour every other week. They just need a touchstone to remind themselves of their goals and help them stay accountable. For other students, maybe with severe ADHD or real trouble, say on top of things, we might do something 3 times a week with a text check-in in between or something like that. So the rates are prorated to the actual amount of time you spend, and that differs by each student. And that a recommendation about how much time to spend and when to meet will be made in collaboration with you and the student and the coach, depending on what are the goals for the student. Other questions? We still have about 10 more minutes. I always got to do the coaching thing where we count to 7 very slowly, waiting for the questions. While we're waiting for other questions, Andrea, do you want to share with us some of, some case studies of maybe 1 or 2 students, where they started and where they ended up and how long it took to get there?
Sure. Let me think. I mean, I think that kind of one of the favorite stories that we bring up all the time is a student I worked with for less than a year, maybe 4 to 6 months, something like that. He actually lived in Saudi Arabia, and he was very motivated and had lots of ideas and did very well in school and had these like really high expectations for himself. So kind of that end of the spectrum, right? So he came to me just wanting to kind of like optimize, right? Get the best out of his academics that he could. And he had great ideas in a bunch of different directions, and he could talk and talk and talk and talk. And what we worked on is like bringing it down, narrowing, asking questions, talking about, even his friendships and his sports and how all these things kind of work together. And he was able to focus in a way that brought him some clarity on like what he was going to do next and what clubs he was going to commit to, and even like who he like cared about being friends with at the end of the day, and like who was going to kind of serve him on those journeys. And I think the favorite quote that Sheila and I use all the time is that he told me that he felt like my role was taking his dirty eyeglasses and just wiping them like this so that he was the one seeing and deciding on his own vision. But I was helping bring some clarity by kind of the parameters that we were working within. So yeah, I think that's probably the most like cohesive story that I have.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I know you've worked with some students who are on the other end of that spectrum. One in particular who I was remembering that his parents thought that he might never go off to college, and he did. Do you want to share a little bit about him?
Sure. So we worked together pretty much all through high school. I think we started when he was a sophomore. And I think what made that engagement particularly successful was, the relationship building and the space that I was able to create so he could come out of his shell, right? Opposite end of having so many ideas and so much confidence, he had very little. And so it took us a much longer time to kind of develop that, talk about what he was afraid of. We worked together all throughout, starting in person and then going virtual and surviving virtual high school. And it took that through, the admissions process, and now he's off as a freshman in college, which is a really, an astounding thing to me to watch a student develop that much. But yeah, those are 2 kind of maybe not quite polar opposites, but very different examples.
Yeah. We have another question from Beth asking about your educational and professional background, Andrea. Want to share?
Oh, wow. Professional background, surprise, is Signet Education. I've been here ever since graduating undergrad in 2014 with a psychology degree. I do have official training through the ICF, International Coaching Federation. Um, but also in my role at Signet, I'm not just a coach, I'm also the leader of our staff. So a lot of my coaching experience, I think, comes from my role in coaching my employees and like getting everybody to where they need to be and setting goals in like a professional setting. So that I think I do way more coaching on a daily basis on the business side of things. But again, I think that brings my unique perspective to the students that I work with. And then what else about me? I'm not sure. I have
Well,
some
you
like
have worked in
volunteer.
like, yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
was about to say. You've got some
yeah,
counseling adjacent work in your life too.
yeah, sure. Yeah, that I
I,
spent a number of years doing that kind of work as well.
Yeah, I also think it's really important to highlight your background as an artist. Andrea is a very talented dancer, and I think that just adds to the perspective that she brings to her work with students. You've worked with students who are not particularly artistic, but that creative element is something that you help students explore, and I think that's really valuable.
Sure. And that's not unique to me in our coaching team either. I think that's actually perhaps something that makes our team quite special, right? Is that we have a lot of folks who are professionally successful, educationally successful, academically, but also, are creative and have success in parts of life, which, points to the fact that this is a holistic thing. Like you really have to be able to expand beyond, just goals in the classroom to do well.
Great. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, if you do have further questions, I guess I have one more slide to share with you, which is the thank you slide. So thank you for joining us and giving us some of your time. And I hope that this has been helpful for you. You can reach us at info@Signet Education. That is our general email box, but you can always find me at Sheila@signeteducation.com. I'm putting this in the chat, and Andrea at signeteducation.com with whatever questions you might have. If you're interested in exploring coaching or tutoring or college admissions for your child, we always start with a free consultation. We're really going to dig into your situation and help you understand if we're a fit for you and you're a fit for us. And if we're not a fit, we have a great network of people that we can always introduce you to. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to chat. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.